is Etienne de Bruin, and it's hard to believe that this time last year I was trying to launch San Diego Rails. And then in a very gentle way, Patrick, kind of like a parent, ushered me into the SD Ruby group. So I'm very privileged to be with you guys. I'm thankful that I'm still in the Ruby group for at my first year. So I'm going to talk about a project that I got involved with very quickly after I told someone I can do Ruby, which was a total lie. And I learned a couple things. I'm pretty sure there's going to be different opinions on how to solve this problem, but this is how I did it. So usually I'm a little apprehensive when a speaker puts their About Me page up, and so I prepared 11 slides for my About Me. Does anybody know that machine? It's an Intellivision machine. I remember when I was at the tender prepubescent age of 19, I saw this machine for the very first time when I was 12. And what I saw there absolutely changed my life, mainly because I saw this. And I was absolutely dumbstruck. And let's just check this picture out quickly. I don't know why I didn't understand the game of baseball as a South African, but this just absolutely rocked my world. I started saving every single 20 cents that I could. There was no quarter in South Africa, and I literally saved up a jar of coins. Instead of buying me an Intellivision, my dad bought me an Atari 800 XL. Anybody know that machine? Has anyone touched that machine? I've touched that machine. I didn't realize that prompt would change my life. And that's literally me typing that at the age of 12. No, I'm kidding. I was doing that so much that I came home one afternoon and my dad bought me this game, O'Reilly's Mine, because he was worried that I wasn't playing any games. I was just coding every day. So I begged my dad for that machine. Does anyone know that? Anyone touch that? The ZX Spectrum. Has a really cool go-to on the G key, so it's really awesome. Then I begged my dad for that machine, the Amiga, which could be in 64 mode or 128, which was mind-blowing. But then things got serious, and he bought me that machine. So that was the Atari ST, and that's basically what consumed my teenage years. Some people who've influenced me greatly through my life has been that guy, this guy, that guy, and that guy. So those are the books that I would like to be buried with one day. And then at the bottom, it's basically this. I went from a very hardcore C environment, and then eventually into Tickle, or TCL, Perl, and then PHP. And so that's basically my About Me, and I did that in 4 minutes. It's not bad. So that brought me came to the United States. I worked at a biotech company, and then I was approached by a friend of mine to start a company. And we built a CMS system in PHP that was a SaaS model in 2006, which was pretty sexy back then. And to this day, it's the livelihood of the company, and it's all done in pre-hypertext processor, PHP. I work at a company called Monkdave, established in 2006. We're in Old Town, 20 employees. We host Ruby Hack Nights since about 12 months ago, and the next one is next week. Everybody is invited to next week. So what led me to Ruby was just the community. It took me a couple of weeks to really realize that I share the same mindset and values, and that I wanted to do things beautifully, and that there was a whole new movement around writing code that looks beautiful. I always thought interpreted code or dynamic languages were sort of a cop-out. And I think we're in a new generation where writing code that actually looks beautiful has all these advantages that other developers can actually learn from. A lot of you who've met me remember how excited I was about the Foostron app. My very first Ruby on Rails app. It still hasn't gone anywhere. So I'm halfway through my slides. I got invited to do this awesome new project to visualize retweets in real time. 4 stakeholders. I negotiated my way up to 31% equity, which I was very proud of. Unfortunately, I only had 2 months to do it, and I had to just get going. This was in March, and most of you know, I was still the SD Rails champion, I think in February, so I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to be a part of it. So I just had to get going. So little did I know that there would be the San Diego 6 News, there would be a politician, and as we were preparing for the demo, this happened. And even as I see that, I just feel my heart beating faster. The demo sucked. It was supposed to be a real-time launch. Habitat for Humanity was there, and my app was going to have a little real-time, everyone was going to retweet this campaign, and all I saw was that. Turned out what happened there was I wasn't handling an exception if the campaign's first tweet couldn't go out because of some API issue. I wasn't handling the return code properly, which meant that I was that. So that's kind of where that story stops for now, and I'll take that up in a few minutes. So what was this cool app? Basically, when you do the tweet, the tweet was supposed to be a sort of a campaign, and then your followers would retweet. And then their followers would retweet. And the goal was to just be able to show somebody how this message was being proliferated. And, it seemed fairly simple, but it wasn't. So what I had to do was basically become familiar with the streaming API, Twitter's streaming API and Twitter's REST API. And in a combination of those two and a few other Ruby tools, I was able to pull this off. So I want to just go into what I learned from the various APIs. With the streaming API, you can monitor different streams. You can monitor just the general stream by a keyword or a phrase or something. There's something called user streams. It's mostly used for desktops, desktop apps. Twitter is trying to help desktop apps not be rate limited the way they are to send back thousands of REST API calls. So you're able to monitor and update a user's stream in real time without getting a rate limited hit. And then they have site streams, which is in beta, with which you can monitor multiple user streams. Again, it's an attempt by Twitter to help the apps that have been handicapped by rate limitations. So I stuck back then, I was using the streaming API, and I still am. So just a quick example, because I had to put some Ruby code into my presentation. This is just a quick example of how you use the tweet stream gem. The tweet stream gem, you basically start up a new client. When you use the track method, you can specify a key phrase, and then it basically uses event machine to stay in a loop. And what I'm doing there is just outputting screen name, the status text, and the status ID. That's just for example, as an example. Problem that I had with the streaming API is not really a problem. It's rate limited in that you can only fire up one connection per user. So at some point, if I was doing some deving and monitoring my stream, I was doing this using a certain user. If I use that same user on a different account, on my staging box, it would not pick up the tweets. I used the tweet stream gem, which recently you were able to just use a username and password, and now you have to use OAuth. The REST API is rate limited. Unauthenticated, you can do about 2 requests a minute, or 150 an hour, I should say. Authenticated, you can do 350 requests an hour. And for that, I used the Twitter gem at GitHub. Just a quick example of how to fire that up was you basically set up your configuration. You fire up a client, and in that example, I'm just calling the method to get the follower IDs given a user screen name. So, how did the app work? Well, I used the tweet stream gem to monitor the stream by a hashtag. That then produced a tweet. I then used that tweet to queue up the user ID in a rescue queue. The problem is obviously if I'm trying to do an API request when that tweet comes in, I may be missing out on other tweets. I would. I mean, maybe you wouldn't, but I would. So the next step then would be also having a rescue worker that would ping Twitter with the user ID, and then I would get a list of followers by ID. And then I used Redis to just basically dump in the follower IDs by user. So I'll explain how I did that. So I used just the basic string type, which is just the key and the value. So the follower ID with a colon follows, just to have a unique key, equals, and then the user ID. So as an example, if Mocha Labs tweets, I would ping Twitter, and then I would build that little list, which I didn't know he only had 3 followers. It's crazy. So basically I would have 3 keys, the number of followers, which would be, and just for my presentation I'm using the username, it's actually the ID. So Etta Bruin follows Mocha Labs, Orange Wolf follows Mocha Labs, and Rubiety follows Mocha Labs. Let's say Benzi, who happens to follow Mocha Labs, retweets. I do the same thing. I take the Benzi user and I go back and I ping Twitter, and I build the same key value storage. So it's all the followers follows, and then the user that did the tweet. This gave me an interesting solution, which I discovered at 3:20 one morning. That if I wanted to just see if I was on a certain follower list, I just had to do this. If I took a user ID and I just appended the follows, I got a Redis key, and then if I got a return value on that in my system, that meant that I knew that person was following. So for instance, in that example, Rubiety follows would return the value Mocha Labs. So if I've lost you a little bit, that's fine. It'll become clear. So here's another example. If Merbus then goes and retweets via Benzi, I just do the same thing. I build a follower list, which is a bunch of keys, and they all resolve to the same value. There is a flaw in this, which, if you know it, you know it. But I won't talk about it because I'm being videotaped. So immediately I would then know I would know that Merbus follows, and then I would know he follows Benzi. So that's basically what I was building. I was taking information from Twitter and just storing it in sort of a memcached environment, which is just a key value storage. So you may be thinking, dude, there's got to be easier ways to do this. You can just do get statuses ID retweeted by. You can get statuses retweets and by ID. The weaknesses in those calls is that it only returns the first 100 objects. And my audience was going to be tens of thousands if things went well. And you have no relationships. So you're always only going to have the original status ID and the new status ID. That's all you're going to have. You're not going to get a delicious JSON array of everybody that was in that retweet. The Twitter JSON array, or the status array, I should say, is pretty awesome. I mean, there's a lot of information in it. It's just, I couldn't use any of it. Yes, you get a retweet count. Just tells you whether that status, how many times that status has been retweeted. There's an in reply to user ID, which you only get if you do an at reply. And then there's a retweeted flag, which basically just says, has this status been retweeted, true or false? So, if I was to use all of this information, I would basically get this. I might have gotten confused with who's retweeting what, but if Monkdave Labs did the first tweet, Benzi did the first retweet, and based on what Benzi did, Mervis did a retweet. I'm only going to get this information, the original status ID and the new status ID. So I'm going to get two arrows that go to that. But what I was really looking for was this. So I would like to know who is retweeting whose tweets in relationship. So there are two types of retweets, as most of you know. There's the Twitter style retweet, which they introduced, I think, about a year and a half ago. And then there's the way that we all used to retweet, which was a quoting a tweet. When you do an actual retweet, what you get back in the JSON array is that the retweeted status is true, and you get the original status ID. If you quote that tweet, though, you don't get any mention of the fact that this is a retweet. You don't get the original status ID, and you have no guarantees on what the status text was, because all of us know with a quote you can completely modify the status text. So the way I dealt with quotes was to introduce an additional dimension, which was just to have a unique URL that would travel inside the status text. People don't really change URLs inside of the tweet. You shouldn't really change anything if you're retweeting and quoting a tweet. But so what I would then use is the unique URL to then identify and try find which tweet this person is retweeting. I used Redis. I fell in love with Redis. I don't know if it's Redis or Redis, honestly. I like Redis. These are just some of the commands I used. The increment, you can just increment the value of a key. You can set and get, which is just the usual string types. rpush, which appends in my case, I append a tweet to a list. Sorted add, I used zadd to basically, as people were retweeting this tweet, I would basically add those users to a sorted set. Lrange, which given an offset, you can just return a certain number of list items. And then I really love the expire key, which I know is in a couple other solutions as well. But basically, I was running into some severe rate limitation with the REST API. So I just used an expire key to just count down 60 minutes so that I could basically rate limit myself to how many queries I'm doing with the Redis, with the rescue worker. And if like for instance, if I do 300 calls in the first 2 minutes, I basically can't do, I'm going to do 50 calls for the remaining 58 minutes. So I just kind of slowed things down. The other tool I used was Arbor, JS. It's a graph visualization. It doesn't actually do the graphics for you, it just does the gravity for you. So you can define a particle system, and you can define the elasticity, you can define the gravity, and all that stuff. And it's actually very, very sexy. I really love it. What I did find with Arbor, though, and you can use it with Canvas or SVG, doesn't matter. I use it with Canvas, and still after about 100, 150 nodes, things started slowing down pretty badly. So I have to go to the JS group to figure that out. So let me just run through what the app did quickly. So you have the client browser on the left. You have I have a tree data controller which I created, and then I have all this data that I've been pouring into the Redis database, or key value store. So what happens is every 5 seconds I poll my controller with an ID and an offset. So for the first time I poll it, the offset is obviously 0. The controller then does an L range on the offset plus n. And so in other words, you start at the offset and then you count n number of items that you want back. If you only get one back, then obviously every 5 seconds you're only going to get one item back. If you send 10 back, then every 5 seconds you're going to get fast activity. It basically translates into more real time or less real times. Sometimes with more real time, you just suddenly get a bunch of nodes, and it doesn't look nice. If you slow it down a little bit, you see nodes popping out. So basically, Redis returns the list, and the controller returns a JSON array. That JSON array, which is one I construct, basically has a from and a to. Those numbers there are IDs. And then some extra Twitter metadata, profile data. And that way I know that, as an example, you have from Benzi to Mervis. So the node will be drawn from Benzi to Mervis based on the relationships that I have stored inside of Redis. And then obviously all the profile data then just gets sent back as well. And then I was really excited when the Cedar Stack came out, because I'm a very hands-on sysadmin kind of guy, and dude, I just couldn't get Passenger and Rails. I mean, I got that working, but I just didn't feel like I was the owner of it. And then with some help, I was able to get my jobs running, and basically using the prop file and then the Redis to go plugin. I don't know that much about it, except that it's really, really sweet. So the worker is the rescue worker, and the stream is basically the stream campaign that basically monitors the live Twitter stream. So just to go back to we're sorry, but something went wrong. I did get it working by some miracle. The Twitter API gave me back some deliciousness. I honestly, I've not been that close to fainting in my life. There was a short circuit, but eventually we were able to demo that. We actually had people retweeting the campaign tweet from inside this audience, and we could see all those nodes popping out. And then I had that guy move away, and then I went and stood in front there so I could get my 2 seconds of redemption. I don't even know what I was pointing at there. So that's basically it. I recorded a little video to show you guys how this thing works in action. But first I want to say thank you to these 3 guys. Rafa taught me the Rails basics of how I can get this thing solved inside of a Rails app. Matt taught me some Ruby basics. What I was doing with the stream campaign was I was using Rails Runner, which was loading the whole environment, the whole Rails stack. So he helped me rewrite that into just a plain Ruby, a very lightweight daemon, and then Mr. Rob himself helped me with the Heroku stuff. So I'm very thankful for that. So I'm going to show you guys what happens. Now, no one's actually doing this. This has been pre-recorded. So the way I applied it is basically through this app called My Giving Tweet. You log in with your Twitter username and password. For this particular app, you can specify a campaign amount. The application is really to try and get people to spread the word that for every tweet, we'll send $1 to Habitat for Humanity. The example I have there is help me buy a bass for my next gig. And you'll notice with this delay, I'm thinking whether that's a good thing to do for this demo. So I actually go back and I change it to STRuby. And I'm trying to remember what the STRuby URL is. And then I'm dynamically constructing the tweet that is going to go out. In this case, obviously, we aren't donating any money to STRuby, but I just basically did a tweet that is fairly innocuous. Great talks here at STRuby tonight, okay? So you fund the campaign with whatever amount you specified in the drop-down. In this case, we're not funding the campaign, so I'm just going to agree and create the campaign. So at this point, you see that screen. When you click on Start the Campaign, the first tweet is actually going to go out. And the timer starts because the campaigns are usually only 24 hours. So there you have your tweet appearing. And then if you look at your Twitter app, you'll actually see that your tweet has gone out. I created a couple test users for this. So this person follows the spaghetti monster and will now do a retweet. And as that retweet happens, so they're doing a retweet, the tweet appears. So you'll notice that there's no relationship because as soon as that worker runs, it does the Twitter API call, it draws the first edge. You'll see I'll have the Twitter profile data there as well. So when that person's follower, who's not following the first person by the way, sees the tweet, that person does a retweet. And actually I'm doing a quoted tweet here, I'm not doing an officially retweet, so I'm using a quoted tweet. And then that pops out immediately and the relationship then gets established to the correct tweet. And then I'm very proud of the fact that I have all that profile data out there. So now what I was demoing is someone who just does a random search for the STRuby user. Doesn't follow any of these people. So I'm doing a search for STRuby. I don't know these people. I happen to enjoy the monthly meeting and I want to go find them. I see there's a tweet and I say, oh, this is cool, I'm going to retweet that. So that's what I'm doing here. And so when that tweet happens, again, a quoted tweet, it could be an official retweet. That appears, and then as soon as I do the Twitter API, I can't color that red because there is no relationship with the person, but it still appears there. So as you're watching this campaign play out, you're sitting and really just get a cup of tea and you enjoy the way this campaign is panning out. So the really cool thing about that is someone who was following this user then sees the tweet and does a retweet. So now you're starting to get a picture of how your tweet is actually proliferating. I tap into the Clout score, the Clout API, because one of the things we want to do is just kind of check, what dollar value can we expect from a person's retweet. And so I think for the final retweet, I think someone who is following this person is going to do a retweet. So the retweet happens for someone on that side, and it should appear. So there it appears, and then the relationship gets established. So that is basically what it is. So if you guys really want to mess with this, you can go to the SDRuby user or the Stephen Bono user right now, and you can see how crazy this thing goes. I have the how do I get to my browser?
It's to your right.
So this is the demo I just did. What is that?
Just maximize the window.
So that's the demo I just did. So if any of you guys want to retweet the message that the SDRuby talks rock or something, I forget what I tweeted. This should show up on this thing. If it doesn't, then I have no idea what's going on. So if you did do a retweet, let me know, and we'll see if some magic happens.
One Judy.
It's kind of the stone cold silence I had at the demo. It was pretty bad.
You're telling everybody to use their phone.
So I'm expecting if you went with Stephen Bono or the SDRuby user, your tweet should come out of this one. Okay, so there we have 2 tweets coming out. And so this person just did a search and isn't following anybody I just mentioned. The same with that person. So it's possible that you guys aren't following SDRuby, which is sacrilege. But there we have it. So I can click on this person and see that I can't. Oh, there's Jimmy. So someone retweeted a message over there. So this is pretty. It's pretty awesome. So that's it. Thanks. Is there any questions or please feel free to
Use the mic. Sorry.
Dude, you are on
It's not that important.
you're on TV right now. Dude.
Oh, sweet. Is it already on?
Sure.
Why did you choose to use the structure for followers and instead of a set on, say, Burgess and all of his followers in a Redis set? Why did you go the other way and have all the keys being the follower and the source being the followee?
That's a good question. I guess that's a way to do it as well. If I could have just built a set of the followers, that's true, and just see if the value was in the set. That's and in fact that might be a good way to solve, because right now the weakness with mine is if I happen to follow 2 people, the key's going to override. So it's just going to follow the latest person. But you know what? At that point, the goal of this app isn't to get really finicky about who's following who that badly. But you're right, the set would totally take care of that problem, because then if the person is following 2 people, I would actually have that information, whereas now I'm just overwriting it.
And you can keep adding to the set, and it won't, if it already has the key in it, it already has the value in it, it just will ignore it and move on. Unlike a list, which will just keep stringing out.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. No, that's totally the way to do it.
All right, that's 2% of your equity now.
By the way, if anyone wants to contribute and help me, I have 31%.
29.
Negotiations are normally 2-way, dude. You said 2, I said 1. I am looking for collaborators on this. By the way, 31% of 0 is 0.
So can you talk a little more about the Arbor JS You said there were some limitations, but I'm assuming that's what we're looking at right now. What's actually generating the image? Is that the JavaScript framework, Arbor?
Yes, so what's generating the image is just my sexy graphic skills in JavaScript. But basically I just define the canvas as a 2D canvas, set up the particle system, and then inside the particle system I am creating nodes. Every time a node gets created, there's a there's a function I call that just draws the rectangle. So I'm basically using X, Y coordinates, and I'm putting these images at fixed offsets. So it's a little clunky because as you're mousing over these things, you're actually getting X, Y's. You're not getting a DOM because it's canvas. So I am drawing the boxes, and Arbor is just moving them.
Can you reload the page? See what it is?
I can find it. So I think I set the offset to 10, so I'm only returning 10 nodes at a time. So then obviously you can move these around and you can go crazy. So again, I was quite disappointed. See, that's a pretty interesting one there. So John. Oh, okay, no way. It's independent. I thought it was. I let this thing loose on Barack Obama when something was happening with him, and it went absolutely nuts. It was as far as visualizations go, this is eye candy. It's not really I was thinking of putting some real data down on the other behind this or underneath this. But this is just really eye candy to see whose tweet has the most influence on your campaign. The one thing that I did see a couple times was you can have a pretty anemic branch as 2 or 3 people retweet, and then suddenly it just hits one person, and because of that person's followers, it just explodes. So if you see at the top here, I'm actually counting that. So we just reached 1,770 followers. There have been 17 retweets. The dollar values are all arbitrary. It's not arbitrary, it's not accurate. At this point, I'm just counting $1 for each tweet, and if your campaign goal is, I don't know how that, what I did there, but for the future application, like I said, I may use a cloud score. So this person's tweet could be worth $44,000, which the algorithms obviously need some tweaking. Is that it? Thank you very much.